talk from Gregor Skacej from Ljubljana, who, as you can see, is going to talk about molecular modeling of liquid crystal elastomers. So,
okay, thank you. So before starting, I'd like to thank also the organizers for their very kind invitation. And so the work I'll be presenting here was done together with Claudio Zanoni from Bologna. And it is, it will be on molecular modeling of liquid crystal elastomers. So we've heard a little bit about that already yesterday in Jaroslav Linitzky's talk, and there'll be a little bit of overlap, but I hope not too much. And it is, this is computer simulation work, so also I have to acknowledge our main providers of computational resources. So it's mainly the European Union through this so-called Namaste Center of Excellence. We have some local funding from the Slovenian Research Agency, but I also have to acknowledge very generously, the Arctur company and our colleagues from the meteorology department for the very generous allocation of computing time within their resources. So the term liquid crystal elastomers, it's coined from two words, actually three, but two words like elastomers and liquid crystals. So elastomers, as you will know, are typically weakly cross-linked polymer networks, rubbers, and you have cross-links where the polymer strands meet, and then they can explore different pathways in between these cross-links. And then, for example, if you pull on your elastomer, if you stretch it, then the number of pathways will be reduced, the entropy will change, will decrease, and you will end up with restoring elastic force. And so you have this so-called mostly entropic rubber elasticity. And there are some macroscopic manifestations of this phenomenon. One of them is a negative linear thermal expansion coefficient, and the other one is Young elastic modulus that increases with temperature. Then liquid crystals, okay, you've seen these pictures many times. So for example, if we are talking of thermotropics, anisotropic organic molecules, you can change orientational order and positional order by temperature. So you have isotropic, pneumatic, and smectic phases. And so microscopically, for example, in case of ellipsoidal molecules, you can have such elongated molecules. And then in case of such molecules, you deal with anisotropic van der Waals and steric interactions, and they provide some parallel alignment that you can see here. What's important here is that, as you know, the orientational ordering can be controlled by external stimuli. So typically temperature changes, as shown here, but also electric magnetic fields, external fields, but also ultraviolet light. And now joining these two types of materials gives you liquid crystal elastomers. Joining means that you have the polymeric chains, and then you embed your mesogenic units. So this can be done in several ways. There are, let's say, two main types. So you have so-called main chain materials, where the mesogens actually are part of the polymer backbone. But then you can have also like a flexible backbone with mesogens attached to it. So in this case, you're dealing with so-called side chain elastomers, and then you have different possibilities also of how to attach them and so on. So this would be like a more artistic depiction of a side chain elastomer here. And what's important in these materials is that such a macroscopic setup will yield a pronounced strain alignment coupling. So the external stimuli that are able to act, for example, on the mesogenic molecules, they will drive a microscopic shape change in your system. And one can easily think of several applications of these systems, for example, typically as sensors and actuators. And so as for actuation, one of the possibilities, of course, is to actuate via temperature changes. So here you can see a nice contraction of your elastomer on heating. Then UV light actuation. This can be done in so-called azobenzene materials, where double bonds between nitrogens can end up. You can find them in different conformations, affecting orientational order. So you can switch between various orientations, between you can affect the degree of order in your system, and this will reflect in macroscopic deformation again. But what's particularly appealing is one would like to try to actuate by switching off and on an external electric field, for example. It turns out that this is not so easy because really strong, enormously strong electric fields would be needed to do that. But there have been proposals, for example, to help to introduce maybe some nanoparticles, carbon nanotubes, for example, to enhance this effect. And okay, so here another brief review. So there is a map. This is a map of different actuators in terms of actuation strain and stress. So looking at with LC, we're dealing with strains of let's say of up to several 100%. Stress is of the order of 100 kilopascal. Time scale is 1 second. So this will place us here somewhere, which is close to muscles, biological muscles, and this is why sometimes these systems are also called artificial muscles. Okay, now a very brief review of LC research so far, incomplete review. So there was an important step was happened in 1991 when Heino Finkelmann from Freiburg in Germany managed to synthesize the so-called monodomain liquid crystal elastomer. So for example, if you don't take care when you synthesize your system, if you don't take care of when you polymerize and cross-link, then you will end up with a so-called polydomain material where you have your director, pneumatic director, oriented in different, the orientation of the director will change from domain to domain. And if you, and the same goes for, let's say, the same is true for the local elongation. So if you want to use such a material for some actuation purpose, so all the domains should act somehow coherently. And this can be done also, the best thing to achieve this is to have just one domain. And this was implemented by the so-called two-step cross-linking procedure, where you have first weakly cross-linked polymer networks, and then use align your sample either by stretching or in an external field, and then perform a second cross-linking step, and this will imprint some easy access into your system. Now, to characterize these systems, you have typically have stress-strain measurements. If you're interested in the underlying orientational order, one of the possibilities is to do deuterium NMR. Then to detect phase transitions, calorimetry can be done. To detect positional order, you can do X-ray scattering. Then these materials, containing mesogenic units, they are also birefringents. You can do polarizing microscopy, also dynamic light scattering, and so on. Theory, as far as theory is concerned, there have been several versions of continuum phenomenological descriptions dating back to Desjardins in 1970s. Some of them really are like Landau types, so you end up with many phenomenological coefficients that you have to measure or find out in some other way. What's particularly nice is a so-called neoclassical rubber elasticity. So this is a nice theory with very little microscopic ingredients. It's basically an anisotropic random walk, biased random walk in space, and results in a so-called trace formula for the deformation, free energy, and it was developed here at Cambridge, actually. And now in the field of simulation, what was done so far, there have been some coarse-grained approaches based on lattice systems, on lattice approximations, finite elements, and only in the recent few years, there have been also some molecular attempts based on pairwise intermolecular interactions. So apart from the work presented here, so that's the work of Jaroslav Ilnitsky, Mike Allen, and co-workers that you saw yesterday, and also very recent contribution by Juan de Pablo group. So this work now will be a molecular simulation of swollen main chain liquid crystal elastomers. So main chains is like this small image here. So we focus on main chain systems because they are characterized by a very pronounced strain alignment coupling. And the other more simplistic reason was that they were also rather easy to build, because in simulation then it was enough to just consider one single type of particles. We also we deal with swollen systems. So many, for example, there's a series of experiments by Kenji Urayama where swollen systems were considered. But here also there was another reason, purely technical reason. Since typically polymer chains are not so easy to equilibrate, we thought that adding some swelling monomers, still of ellipsoidal shape, would somehow increase the internal mobility of the sample while still conveying pneumaticity to the neighboring chains and so on. So this is also kind of helping in our simulation. And of course, one of our goals then was to try to predict selected experimental observables. I mean, some of the experimental observables that you can see here on this list. Okay, so this is let's say, an example of what our samples look like. So this is actually a cubic simulation box, and with the periodic boundary conditions applied. And so here the elastomer, our system, was blown up by, let's say, by negative pressure shock, just to show some, to be able to see any details. And so the swelling monomers are not shown at all. And what we do is, we prepare our sample basically by setting up a regular array of parallel chains, polymer chains. So the color coding here goes as like red, green, and blue, corresponding to orientation along X, Y, and Z axis. So that the blue chains that are the ones, so the blue chains kind of correspond to the to this main part of the main chain architecture. Of course, they have to be cross-linked, so they are cross-linked with this red and green, let's say, monomer. With this red and green ellipsoids that you can see here. And so in this way, as you can see, mostly blue color is prevailing. So what's obvious is that in this way, we have imprinted a easy direction along the z-axis, and this is somehow our substitute of following the thin command two-stage cross-linking procedure. So so we have these three different monomer types. So one is the bonded monomers, that's mostly the blue ones, then the cross-linker, like this one here, and then the free monomers not shown in the plot. Then, of course, one has to decide on what kind of pairwise interaction to consider in the simulation. So we started with standard gay burn potential. So as you heard in the previous talks, it's basically an anisotropic version of the Lennard-Jones 612 potential. But it turned out to be, the calibration of these systems was rather poor. So at the same time, we also learned about this soft core potential, also introduced a few days ago. And so while the standard gay burn, the standard gay burn would promote pairwise, side-to-side molecular alignment to give rise to pneumatic and other ordered phases. And this would, of course, the side-to-side alignment curve would be the red one here. But then to get rid somehow of the rather steep power 12 repulsive core, we decided to replace it with this soft core potential and blend it continuously. And this actually turned out to be quite to help a lot in our equilibration of our systems. And so this is like a typical sketch. So in addition to having, let's say, interactions between the ellipsoids themselves, we also have to bond the particles belonging to the network. So the interparticle bonds here are modeled by the so-called finitely extensible nonlinear elastic potential, FINI. It's quite frequently used in polymer science. And so we applied both to stretching of the bonds and to bending. And so in comparison with a, let's say, Hookean harmonic ensemble, it penalizes large deformations more than the harmonic one, and also has a logarithmic divergence, which actually imposes some maximum deformation range, and in other words, the elastomer we are considering here cannot be torn, it cannot break. So, okay, to find our equilibrium configurations, we do isostress Monte Carlo. So we have a modified metropolis acceptance criterion. So instead of just having delta U, delta energy in this scheme, so this is the probability of accepting. What you're seeing here is that the probability is for the acceptance of an attempted trial move. So instead of having just delta U here, we have delta U minus stress times some sample box size along the z-axis, which means that we decided to apply stress along the sample z-axis, and we end up with two control parameters, external control parameters. One is the temperature, like in the normal metropolis algorithm, and we also have we have stress imposed from outside. So in the language of statistical thermodynamics, this is like performing a Legendre transform. And okay, we picked this parameterization from some previous work, and the trial moves that we consider here for the Gay-Byrne ellipsoids is translate the molecule without rotation. Then the other trial move type is rotating the molecule without translation. Then what is essential also in equilibrating the chains is rotating bonded pairs. So this can also help a lot in equilibrating the system. And of course, if we want to look at macroscopic deformations of our system, we have to implement also collective moves affecting the sample as a whole. So we have these resize moves. So these resize moves, they will happen, they occur at constant volume. So we assume the elastomer to be essentially incompressible. Okay, then we perform several many Monte Carlo cycles for equilibration production. So typically it was like 17 or up to 20 million cycles for equilibration, 1 million typically for production. And we consider samples of from 8,000 to over 200,000 particles. Impose periodic boundary conditions, and for the larger ones also some parallelizing techniques are needed to obtain some results. Okay, so the first set of results concerns a temperature scan. So what you see here is that okay, maybe let's get back. You recall the sample I was showing you on one of the previous slides. It was blown up by negative pressure shock, right? So what we do first, before starting the simulation, we isotropically compress the sample to almost close packing, and so this is what we call then our reference sample. This is the starting point then for all of our simulations. Now, dropping the cubic simulation box constraint, we let the system evolve as it wants at zero stress, and then for different temperatures we have these different snapshots. So for example, at T star, temperature equal 3 units, dimensionless units, we end up with a system that's pretty much elongated along the z-axis. You can see that the system kind of recovered the previously imprinted z-axis, and so it's elongated along along the z-axis, and there is a lateral compression to maintain volume. So the gray particles correspond to the swelling monomers, and the particles, and the colored particles, they correspond to the ones belonging to the network. Now, for example, we can reduce our temperature, and you can see that in this case, at T star equal 1.5, we have nice smectic layering. So we have a smectic here. Then on the other hand, if we increase temperature, so the system will get a bit shorter, and the orientational order will be a bit, reduced. And then between 6 and 7.5, we can see clear transition from the aligned nematic phase to a isotropic phase, which is accompanied also by significant contraction along the previously imprinted z-axis. And so here you have all three colors represented more or less equally, so it's really isotropic, even more so for the even higher temperature. And okay, maybe to trying to be a bit more quantitative, we can also plot, let's say, sample size, simulation box size as a function of temperature. So at here at 6 and something, you can see this Ni transition very clearly. And this is also accompanied by a change in P2, the global order parameter versus temperature. You can also see a nice jump here. So this transition here appears to be kind of discontinuous still, although in many experiments a rather smooth dependence is seen. Okay, we can also look at thermodynamics. Here we have specific heat calculated from the fluctuations of the internal energy. And again, we have a peak at the Ni transition, nematic isotropic, and another peak at the smectic nematic transition. Okay. Now, going to some, let's say, selected experimental observables. One of the possibilities to do is to look, to put your sample in a NMR spectrometer and look at the spectra to have an idea about the orientational ordering. So, what you can do is you can deuterate your particles, and then you have deuteron nuclei with a non-zero quadrupolar nuclear quadrupolar moment, and then these nuclei will end up. They feel the gradient of the carbon-deuteron bond, and it turns out that this results in a splitting of Zeeman levels once the system is placed into an NMR spectrometer. And this splitting, this perturbation depends on the relative orientation of the molecular long axis and the NMR spectrometer field. And this is given by, it's a P2 type dependence. So that's the long axis, and that's this direction of the field. And this is some coupling constant. So what we do here to get the spectra is we try to mimic an actual NMR experiment. So if you put your sample in an NMR spectrometer, then you apply a so-called pi/2 pulse, your magnetization will start to precess, and then then what you can detect is a so-called free induction decay signal, and then Fourier transforming it, you will end up with the spectra. So here we have a collection of these spectra from lowest to the highest temperature considered, and for example, if you apply our NMR field along the z-axis. Since the system is homogeneous, if the system was perfectly homogeneous, you will end up just with a doublet of 2 lines, and the splitting turns out to be proportional to the degree of ordering in your system. So we can see that at a high, or let's say isotropic temperature, indeed, where we expect the order parameter to be equal to 0, the quadrupolar interactions are averaged out, and we end up with a peak at 0 splitting. And then now just concentrate on the blue set of lines. For example, at the lowest temperature, we can see a nicely resolved doublet, and the system is almost perfectly ordered. So this corresponds to a very high P2, almost close to 1. Now, as we increase temperature, now the splitting will go down. And what you will also see is that you will end up with such a double peak structure on both sides. So it turns out that this outermost peaks, that they correspond to the contribution coming from the deuterated network, and the innermost peaks, the inner peaks here, they will correspond to the swelling monomers. The swelling monomers they're not bonded to the network, so they're a little bit more mobile, and this is why they're characterized by a slightly lower degree of ordering, and this is nicely visible here. And but despite this two-component character of our system, still it seems that we observe just a single Ni transition, so there's no significant phase separation in our system. Then the other set of curves, the other two sets of curves, red and green, correspond to an NMR field directed perpendicular to the directors along X or along Y, and their overlap actually suggests that the system is quite uniaxial. Okay, so the other experimental observable we decided to look at were the simulated X-ray patterns. So in this calculation, we assume that the ellipsoids, we're dealing with ellipsoidal scatterers, and then just following some procedure also followed by Bates and Luckhurst several years ago, we ended up with these patterns here. So what we are looking at here is basically just some kind of two-dimensional Fourier transform of the density of the system. And so this is a smectic temperature. So these two are nematic, and this one corresponds to an isotropic stage point. And so first of all, you have to ignore this central cross here, because this is just a finite size effect. And so in our case now, the director was directed vertically, and we have nice peaks here, and so on. And these correspond to the correlations along the nematic director. But we also have lateral correlations, and these are visible here as these lateral arcs. And if you look at the position of the two peaks, so that this is from center to here, is 3 units, and this this is from center to the first peak in this horizontal and in the vertical direction is just 1 unit, and this is compatible with our 3:1 size ratio of our particles. Okay, so another nice thing to do is, of course, if you have an elastomer, it's very nice to try to. It's very tempting to pull on it, to try to stretch it. Now, what we have here is the simulated stress strain experiments, so what we did first was we applied a stress along the nematic direction, which is not the more interesting possibility, but we start with that. And then if you do this in the nematic phase, which is aligned anyway, it's nothing really dramatic will happen. So what you see here are the stress strain isotherms. So this is the dimensionless temperature, and so this is now this would correspond to pulling from the already aligned system. Not much really happens, and even at a somewhat higher temperature, not much really happens. However, if you start pulling from the isotropic phase, first the system will kind of try to resist a little bit, and then at some point you have a stress-induced phase transition, and then you align your sample, and that's it. If you increase your temperature even higher, if you go to even higher temperatures, then this jump disappears, and you end up with a continuous curve. So it's like, and this looks now it looks like subcritical and supercritical behavior, and it's a very similar thing. Actually, can be observed in a monomeric liquid crystal exposed to an external, let's say, electric field or something. And here, what one can invoke instead is to think of a mechanical aligning field instead of an electric field. So it's kind of analogous in terms of situation. What's also interesting here is that one can estimate the elastic moduli, and it turns out that okay, in the nematic phase they are really high. They're even higher than experimentally predicted. But anyway, if you have your sample already very aligned, on pulling, you just deform a little bit the Feeney bonds, and that's it. However, here in the we get much lower values for the Young modulus in the isotropic phase, and more importantly, what you can see is that the modulus increases with the increasing temperatures. So we believe that this is the signature of entropic elasticity. So we have like the isotropic phase, the chains, polymer chains, kind of being able to explore phase space better than once they are already aligned. And okay, it seems that we have this entropic elasticity only in the isotropic phase. In the nematic phase, this entropic elasticity could have been kind of recovered if we had so-called hairpins in our system. But since the on average, we have a rather short crosslink to crosslink distance. So it's just 8 units, and crosslinks are not very probable in our systems. So maybe now we can make a brief comparison to go a few years back with this very simple lattice model that we tried to introduce a few years ago to see if there is any similarity or yeah. Now, so this lattice model is actually development of a Lever-Lasher model, and we heard lots on Lever-Lasher models actually earlier during the talk, during this workshop. So what we have here, we have a cubic lattice. We have this, let's say, elastomeric material with mesogenic units, and then in each unit cell we have some, let's say, effective local director or represented by unit vector or spin. And so we have then what we have is an interaction between nearest neighbor cells given by this kind of Hamiltonian. So P2 is the second Legendre polynomial. For epsilon ij positive, you end up with a parallel aligning tendency, and this is what's frequently used also in liquid, in normal monomeric liquid crystals to model various types of systems. Of course, thinking of an elastomer, it's one needs to introduce deformation somehow. So we think just of simply, we just simply thought of a deformable cubic lattice as shown in this plot, and then if we assume that we have so-called phantom chains, non-interacting Gaussian chains, pseudo-Hamiltonian of this kind can be written down. So lambda is this distortion factor, and here we also assumed sample incompressibility. But now the most important ingredient, of course, again, is to couple the strain and alignment. And we decided to proceed in a rather in a manner very similar to the Myers-Alpert theory, where each molecule experiences a local aligning field, and the strength of this field somehow is proportional to the degree of ordering of the surrounding nematic material. So again, here we have this P2 term describing the field, the action of a field. So field here is directed along the z-axis, and here we have this Q of lambda, which is a field, what we say, mechanical field strength, and this mechanical field strength depends on the actual deformation of our system. So if the deformation, if lambda is equal to 1, if there's no deformation, this Q should vanish. There should be no aligning tendency, and it should be positive if we pull on the sample. If you compress on the sample, it should be compressed. It should be negative, and so on. Then we have another parameter here. This chi will actually determine also will help in determining the magnitude of this internal field, mechanical field. And then it turns out that if you take this chi positive, so this will result in an alignment along the pulling direction, like in main chain systems. If we go with a negative chi, this will correspond to the opposite situation, like in a side chain system. And again, we perform these stress-strain experiment pulling, and here again you have the stress-strain isotherms, and they're pretty similar to what was seen for the Gay-Burn system. And again, also here in the inset, you can see the Q of lambda dependence, so no deformation, no Q, and this is actually calculated as P2 of cosine theta averaged on a deformable sphere. So you can deform it to an ellipsoid to have a positive value, or compress it to have a negative value. What we also see here is this. It's a birefringent, simulated birefringence. So if you put your sample in between two crossed polarizers, then the measured intensity of transmitted light will be basically just proportional to the P2, to the degree of ordering in your system, and it's coherent with what's shown on in the upper plot. Okay, then we also did temperature scans. So for example, for a regular sample with this all epsilon interactions positive, we have similar curves as in the Gabern case, like here, and looking at P2, similar story can be seen. And we also looked at NMR, single peak, double peak, and then one can also play with this epsilon ij constants in the Lebov-Lasher terms. So if you take some of them positive, some of them negative, then you end up with a frustrated system, like a glassy character. And it turns out that there is no, in such a system, that there is no net ordering. So the global P2 remains equal, it's 0, but below some temperature, there's some local frozen in ordering, like a glassy ordering. And this nicely reflects also in the NMR spectra, because here instead of 2 well-resolved lines, we have a so-called take-type powder pattern. Okay. Now, however, there's an even more striking phenomenon in liquid crystal elastomers. It's called soft elasticity. And so, for example, if one had a monomeric liquid crystal, if you start from the isotropic phase, you cool down your system, you will have your nematic director established along one direction. So and all of the directions kind of are equivalent if you have no external confinement or something, or an external field. And then in between these equivalent, one can rotate the director. Then in between these equivalent, let's say, orientations at 0 free energy cost. So now the question is, can something like this happen also in a liquid crystal elastomer? And it's not very obvious why this should be possible, because anyway the nematic material is embedded in a polymer matrix somehow. There has been a nice, and it turns out this can be done, provided that the rotation of the director is accompanied by a shear deformation. So you have so this ellipsoid here corresponds to the distribution of end-to-end distribution of polymer chains, and this is rotated without any change in shape. So this is why there is no free energy cost in this case. And this is nicely predicted also by the so-called trace formula developed by Professor Warner and co-workers. And there are also, of course, there are experiments. One can try to probe this soft elasticity by applying stress, now not along but perpendicular to the existing director. And so some of the stress strain isotherms are shown here in this plot, and you can see that there's typically some at some point you reach a plateau where this deformation kind of where the system seems to deform kind of softly at rather low free energy cost. And if you are dealing with a larger sample, what you can typically see is domains of opposite rotation, so-called stripe domains that you can also detect optically, as here. Now, you can see that here, for example, here in this plot, in this curve, there is there's some threshold. So before this rotation kind of takes place, there is a well visible threshold, and this is typically because you can have in your system typically has some imprinted or residual anisotropy or some easy axis, like our systems do, also our simulated systems. And then first, if you apply so you have some kind of internal field, and then when you apply some external, let's say, mechanical field or some other field perpendicular to your existing field, first your existing field has to be overcome to allow then for the director rotation, and this is what's called then semi-soft elasticity. So of course we were tempted to perform this kind of experiment also in our simulations, but for some technical reason it was not possible to do it by applying mechanical stress perpendicular to the director. However, one can invoke director rotation also by other means, by other types of fields, for example, by an external electric field. And this is also has been done, for example, experimentally by Kenji Urayama, who studied the so-called electromechanical effect. So now what we have here is, we have our sample, again aligned along the z-axis, and then we apply a field, electric field, perpendicular to our to the director, and then above some thresholds, the mesogenic units will rotate according. The director will rotate towards the direction or towards the orientation of the external electric field. So this would be the corresponding contribution to the molecular interaction energy with the field. And so here we have this eta parameter that we take positive. It is proportional to the field strength squared and to the dielectric anisotropy. So in so-called positive materials, you will have the nematic director that aligns along the field direction. And what we have here is, okay, what we also did for simplicity, just we assume the electric field to be homogeneous. And so we can see some kind of striped domains of the opposite direction rotations. What can be also seen is that the swelling monomers, they follow nicely the rotation of the network. So again, it's like 50-50. It's roughly half particles bonded, half non-bonded. And then, okay, maybe we can look at the simulation box size versus field strength. So again, here you can see there is a threshold, and then directional rotation will happen at constant volume. So, for example, if you focus on this set of curves, what we wanted to explore here was what happens with the threshold if we increase the system size. So these two curves belong to two systems with different system size. And it turns out that within our resolution, more or less, the threshold remains the same. So this suggests that somehow we have here actually an external electric field, bulk field, acting against another bulk field, which is this so-called mechanical field imposed by the polymer. And this is as opposed to a similar phenomenon seen in monomeric liquid crystals, the so-called Frederick's effect, where you have the walls, surface anchoring, surface effect that contrasts the applied bulk field. In that case, we have, in the Frederick's case, you end up with a so-called critical voltage. However, since we have a bulk effect against the bulk effect, we end up with a critical field strength. The other curve here corresponds to another system which contains many more swelling monomers. And again, it turns out that many more means, okay, here the ratio is 1:1, here the ratio is roughly 4:1. So we have 4 units of 4 times. We have 4 times as many non-bonded monomers as the ones belonging to the network, and the threshold still seems to remain the same, but the overall rotation occurs over a narrower field strength range, and so such a system seems to be much more mobile. Now, okay, we have this threshold. One can also estimate the magnitude of the field strength field strength corresponding to this threshold. It turns out to be actually quite high. So this resistance to rotation, in our case, is still rather high, and so the existence of the threshold somehow suggests that we are dealing with semi-soft systems. But okay, when talking of semi-softness, it's maybe better to be a bit more careful here, because in addition to seeing a threshold, it would be necessary maybe also to look at what happens to the polymer strand end-to-end distribution upon this rotation. It turns out that our systems are rather small, so it's not really easy to get good statistics to have reliable data on this issue. And but probably this rotation, this distribution is not really conserved because we have our domain size somehow is, let's say, the distance between the domains is quite comparable to the actual crosslink to crosslink distance. So we actually, so this actually may affect this distribution as well. But in a larger system, it would be probably this distribution would be more similar to what you saw on this plot with the rotating ellipsoid and so on. Okay, now here you have a more artistic look of this event going from zero field to strong field. What you can also see here is that the lateral sample dimension somehow doesn't change very much, which was also observed it's like this. It's like this. So this was also then observed in the Urayama experiments, and of course, yeah, one can also expose the sample to X-rays. So the director, initially the director is pointing along the Z direction, and so we have the familiar nematic pattern. Again, please, you have to ignore this central cross here. And then above the threshold, we have superimposed signatures from the two domains. So, and of course, so there's the two corresponding directors here. And going to rather high to a very strong field, an almost 90-degree rotation is accomplished for the director. Then one can also play. One can apply. So that was the more interesting part. I mean, applying a field perpendicular to the director. One can also, of course, apply it along the director and also see what happens with the isotropic phase. And like in this mechanical field case, we are able to induce a transition from the isotropic. So that's isotropic temperatures here, from the isotropic to the nematic phase, and but in this case, it turns out that the thresholds are much higher than the ones estimated for the so-called semi-soft rotation, semi-soft actuation, and they don't seem to be so promising. Okay, now to conclude, what we had here was a soft-core Gay-Byrne molecular model for swollen main chain elastomers. We have symplectic nematic isotropic transitions, and some simple stress strain experiments with stress aligned along the director. We have the sub-supercritical behavior, which qualitatively agrees with this early lattice modeling, and we did, and also with the phenomenological picture of this mechanical field, let's say. Then we had a look at two modes of electromechanical actuation, and including this so-called semi-soft geometry, where the field is applied perpendicular to the director. We have this direct rotation now, and the stripe domains that can be observed in our system. And okay, so here some references. Maybe I can just mention that in this series of lattice models, we also had, there was also a biaxial version, and okay, so thanks for your attention.
Very much, Gregor. We have time for one or two questions. Friederike.
So why doesn't, if you apply an electrical field, why doesn't just the same thing happen than if you apply a mechanical field? Is there an intuitive explanation for that?
Okay, so the explanation is that, okay, the electric field will act, let's say, on each molecule individually. So it will have, let's say, access throughout the whole volume and so on. The fact that we were not able to achieve the same goal by applying a mechanical field, I believe, is just related to the slightly artificial architecture of our networks. So what happens in our system is that, okay, you have your polymer chains aligned like this way. So what one would expect at some point the polymer chains to bend and to have the same situation as in the electric field. But what the polymer chains prefer to do is actually they prefer to, the y direction, the lateral direction, gets smaller and smaller. So they reorganize, let's say, the stack along the direction of the applied stress, and only after this has happened in a massive way, the expected domain formation will occur. But then we ended up with a technical problem because in one direction the sample was really has gotten really thin, and then we break up with our cell structure in identifying the nearest neighbors and so on. So it was not possible longer to employ it.
In the case of mechanical stress, you wouldn't expect these tribes, would you? Or would you?
Yeah, you would. Actually, experiments, just the actual experiments, they do that, yeah.
So one here first, then Mark.
Gregor, what in your experiment prevents shear? So you apply a field, a horizontal field, and the lateral edges stay vertical. Why? What prevents shearing? Is there boundary conditions?
Yeah, it's purely boundary conditions. So it was some kind of, as I understand, it was some kind of shear, but we actually never looked at the deformation tensor locally. But so all the snapshots that you saw, they are subject to periodic boundary conditions. So it's
But they're always rectangular periodic boundary conditions.
yes. Yeah, okay. But just if you focus just on one domain.
I mean, a simple shear like that is not a periodic boundary. What does rectangular boundary condition mean?
Okay, we have, I mean, the angle between our simulation box sides is fixed and it's 90 degrees, so they're just perpendicular. But, okay, but if you focus on...
It's not allowed.
No, it's not allowed, yeah.
Well, it reappears on the other side, doesn't it? You just
Yeah, it reappears on the other side. But maybe if you just focus on one of the two domains, then it looks like kind of shared in some way.
Mark had a question.
It's just follow up to Frederico's question, really. So you've kind of got two energy scales in your system. You've got the energy scales associated with the rotation of your mesogenic units, and you've also got these Feeney constraints,
Yes.
including the angular constraints.
Yes.
How do you know you've got those two energy scales right in terms of the behavior of the polymer? Can you sort of...
Okay, we actually...
It must influence the behavior, and you haven't really got any good microscopic things to compare to that.
Yeah, I mean, so we actually didn't really test against many values of this bending constant within the theme. That's true. So maybe we
just relative to that motion as well.
The value of the field applied experimentally in Urayama. The field applied in Urayama experiment, that's the challenge was to do an electrical actuator, apart from the technical difficulty. It's also strong of the order of 70 volts per micron, while we have 100 volts per micron. So if our constants were widely wrong, we would expect also that the fields would be correspondingly widely wrong, but we didn't do fitting.
Yeah, but in any case, probably reducing this bending constant would resolve the technical problem that we had with the mechanical stress, because it seems, I mean, maybe they're a bit too stiff, the rods. Although the persistence length, typically, if you have a look at the persistence length of the of a free rod, it's of the free chains, it's like of the order of, let's say, two mesogenic units. So it's pretty flexible, but still, the chains seem to prefer not to bend and prefer to reorganize to form these stacks, and then we break down with our nearest neighbor scheme.
Martin, his hand up.
Yeah, you have the periodicity of the electrically deformed state. You think it is intrinsic, or is it governed by some parameters?
So it turned out, okay, you can perform these experiments, simulated experiments, I mean, without much care, just a quench exposed to an external field, and then you will end up with plenty of domains. But in the end, typically, they will relax to accommodate just two domains in the simulation box.
Size dependent.
So it appears to be, yes, just to minimize the number of domain walls.
Okay, let's thank Gregor once more.